Hey, what's up guys? My name is Moda and welcome back to the Mining Stacker YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about that KS5, KS5 Pro price drop. We're going to give our thoughts and opinions on it. We already know the price. We do have a few more details and we're going to give our thoughts whether this thing could be worthwhile, whether there's value there. Just going to give you just my thoughts, how I look at it, what I consider getting it, and what I do when I'm considering these things. So when I say run the numbers, just going to give you some quick estimates so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about when I say that, right? We also did get an update on that K8 Box Pro. We do have price points for that thing now, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the price here towards the end of it. So if that sounds good, guys, stay tuned. Let's get to this thing. So I was in the middle of recording my monthly ASIC pricing update video. When I got to this thing, went into a rant trying to answer all the questions I've been getting about it. So just canceled that, decided to just do a dedicated video on it. Because 15 minutes later, I was like, this kind of deserves its own video, right? So we do know the price now. We do have a few more details. We're going to just talk about overall thoughts on it, right? So KS5, KS5 Pro, 500 bucks a terahash, bringing this guy to 10,500. One of the biggest questions we had is this like a marketing stud? Is it a publicity stunt? Is there just going to be 5 units available and they're just kind of doing it to mess with the other manufacturers a bit, mess with their pricing schedule? Now we kind of know it's not going to be the case. A lot of the other stores have now reflected this new price for this August batch, signaling to me that this is likely to be a fairly significant batch coming out, okay? So it does look like that's going to be the new MSRP going forward, not just for the Pro, but also the KS5. We'll look at the vendor listings here in a second. Another interesting thing to note, there is going to be another model. So shout out to T-Swift, he pointed this out to me earlier. So if you go under the firmware listings, there is now a listing for a 18 terahash unit, right? So if we go on Bitmain site, you go under the TF card service pack, which is the firmwares. They do have an 18 terahash unit listed, which is kind of interesting. Most likely something to get them into that like $10,000 price range, right? Or maybe just something in between now and then. Maybe it'll drop in the next month or so, and it's maybe just kind of an in-between because currently the spot prices are still the same, right? So as we look at the prices, we can see some of the major stores. So like Nhash, for example, they do have the August batch now at 12,000 essentially. The spot price is still 30K. Enough. Freaking miner, BT miners has same thing. They have it at 11.5 and stock price at 30,800. So I do constantly mention these three when I'm doing like price things. Main reason I use Nhash is because I've purchased with them before. Do not have affiliate links or anything with them. It's just out of the big box stores, they tend to be the cheapest, so they are good for price comparing. BT miners, I do have an affiliate link with them. The main appeal here is the fact they're one of the few where you can use credit cards, right? So prices sometimes are on par with some of the others. The disadvantage though is that you're going to pay for that advantage, right? So you are going to pay sales tax. You are going to pay a credit card processing fee also on top of that. So just factor that in. But for you guys who aren't comfortable using crypto to pay for anything, that is definitely an option that is there, and they are usually fairly well priced, right? Same thing, I've purchased through them before, no issues with them. And then Miner Bros, just because that's what a lot of the other tubers use for price comparisons, they are pretty much always on the high end, right? There's no other way to put it. You can even see here there's a pretty drastic difference. But again, all three of these, which are some of the major stores, all are reflecting an August batch, which is again signaling that chances are it's going to be a pretty big batch, okay? So now that we know that this is likely to be big, what does that mean? The hash rate's going to go up, okay? So the biggest factors overall here, if you're considering getting this guy, okay? Number one, this is a futures batch, meaning it's an August batch, not likely to get it until sometime in September potentially. Maybe they do it early August and you get it that month, but a lot can happen between now and then. So one of the biggest factors is what the competition will do. Because again, now they have time to strategize, time to think about things, and see what they're going to do to potentially undercut them. Okay, so that would be one big potential here is if, for example, Ice River, which out of the other competitors, this is the one I would consider getting out of the batch. Okay, So it's definitely over the IB link and most likely over the GoldShell because they tend to be overpriced. Ice River tends to be on par with their pricing, so we'll see what they do here. But let's give the example here because now we know that Bitmain unit's going to be $500 a terahash. And again, it's extremely likely they're going to lower their price sometime between now and August. Will it be in the next few days, next few weeks, a month or two? We don't know. We don't know to what extent either. But what we do know is that Bitmain's going to be at about $500 a terahash. And if these guys don't change their price, they keep it as is, the Bitmain unit is definitely way more appealing, right? Double the hash rate, half the power, similar price. Okay, so because of that, that leads me to believe that there's a pretty good likelihood they're going to reduce the price here. Now, by how much? So let's say they were to undercut them, not only match it, but to undercut them, because again, for me, they would definitely have to undercut them. Even if they were to match the price, the Bitmain is still definitely the superior unit all day. So if they were to go down to 450 or go down to 400 a terahash, that would make it more appealing. Then at that point, that would bring the 10 terahash unit down to about $4,000 if they were to go down to that level. Pretty appealing now at that point because factoring in the prices are about 12K over here from a lot of the stores. If you go through an individual reseller, so like shout out to T-Swift, they typically are cheaper. He is a trusted person in the community. He has his under 11K, which is definitely cheaper than those. But let's say, comparing it to the street price of the stores, let's say they go down to 4K, you could get almost 3 of them, bringing to a total of 30 terahash for that price. That is definitely one huge risk, because depending on what you're looking for also though, if you're dead set on Bitmain or nothing, then this is not a factor for you, right? Because at that point, that's what you want. Let's say you want the biggest and the best. You're going to go there. If you want to get it hosted, that's where you're going to go also. A lot of places will no longer host Ice River units, so if that's a factor, then this is definitely not even something to consider. But for me personally, this is kind of what I would be looking for, because at 4K, that would be my other ASIC. Right? So very curious to what they see. So far, they haven't budged, and they're probably not going to, right? They have to really consider what they're doing. But the fact that, again, they are listed on those other stores, to me, just signifies that that's going to be their new MSRP going forward. Okay. So that's one huge factor. Aside from the obvious, right, we do know the monthly 6% emission reduction, which we know, which is a given. The other big one, though, to me, the biggest one, aside from this one, number 2, the hash rate. The hash rate is a big factor. So in the 5 months that I've been mining with mine, that's been the biggest factor. The 6% is not even that big of a deal. It's the hash rate increases, which have been getting hammered with, right? So if we look at the current hash rate, we're currently at about 250 petahash, okay? So for example, when I got my KS3M, we were about 80 petahash, so it has 3x since then. Okay, so one thing to think about here though, one thing that does look good in the favor of getting one potentially now, because I'm going to compare its current value versus the value when I got my KS3M, because it is very similar actually, oddly enough. Okay, the reason I'm saying that is if we look at the current yield, which again, when we're looking at these things, when you're looking at future profitability, doing calculations, focus on that yield. Don't focus on the fiat profitability. Yes, you want to see if you're break even or better at a loss, etc. But in like Kaspa's case, you're going to be profitable for quite a while because these things are so efficient. So again, like for me, whether it's making 20 bucks a day, 50 bucks a day, 100 bucks a day, doesn't matter. I'm concerned with the yield because that's what I base my profitability numbers in the future for, right? Because I'm not going to be selling now. That's why I don't care about it now. I'm going to be selling in 2025 when it matters. Okay, so that's why I tend to focus on that, because again, the price can fluctuate. Like recently we had this dip. So you can see with a lot of the ASICs, they dropped drastically. The yield stayed the same, but the fiat values what changed, right? And same thing as if we go up in price. Let's say Kaspa doubles, the fiat profit is going to double, but the yield is going to stay the same. Okay, so again, that's where my focus is. Okay, just because my strategy is to mine and hodl and then sell then. I'm not selling anything now. Okay, so it's also dependent on your strategy. I know some people don't do that. Some people take out and they pay their electric out of there, and that drastically does change things, right? But depends on your viewpoint there. But back in December when I got my KS3M, oddly enough, this is how much I was yielding. I was yielding about 750 Kaspa a day. The difference is that the hash rate has 3x'd since then. Okay, so now currently you can even see it reflected here is down to 227. Okay, so the reason it's kind of similar, right? Because the KS5, it's 1011K. At the time when I got my KS3, it was about 8K shipped. So yes, there's a bigger increase with the KS5. The biggest difference though is the fact that it's not as likely for the same thing to repeat in terms of the hash rate increase. For the hash rate to triple from this point, it would take a boatload of units, so it's not extremely likely. Okay, versus when I got mine, it was still a smaller network, and even if you go farther back, I don't know if you guys remember early on, literally every batch, the hash rate was doubling, meaning your yield was getting cut in half. Okay, and the reason I focus on the yield or the hash rate doubling, because that's the point where it takes it, where your yield is going to get cut in half. Okay, so currently now though, because the network is a lot more mature, slightly better value in my opinion with the KS5 currently than when I got my KS3M. And in terms of how the KS3M has played out, again, it paid itself off in 5 months. And not just fiat profitability wise, but when we do the comparison of how much, if I would have just bought 8K worth of Kaspa, I'm in a better position now. Okay, so I have definitely done well with it, and it's up to you to determine that. Okay, so this is not a video to say, oh, this is a good buy, do this, do that. It's up to you. It's just the way I look at things. Okay, because you have to take people's opinion into consideration, but at the end of the day, it's up to you to determine that value, determine that risk versus reward, and see what makes sense. Okay, because for example, even when I got mine, that was at the time where everybody was making videos, oh, don't buy Kaspa ASICs, oh, it's stupid, you're never gonna. And running the numbers, like I mentioned, even when I bought it, I did those videos at that time, why I bought it. Same exact concept, same exact video I'm doing here. Okay, so for me, even though everybody was saying all this, you have to trust your numbers, you have to trust your gut, you have to see what makes sense to you. Okay, so something to think about there. Okay, so again, it's yielding about the same. So again, I just don't think it's gonna triple, right? So let's do some guesstimations now on what we think the hash rate can increase to, right? So currently, again, we're about a 250 petahash, basing off of previous batches, right? Not necessarily with Kaspa, but regarding, like, for example, the K3s, the K7s, different altcoin ASICs, they've been in the neighborhood of like 2,000 to 3,000 units, okay? So if we play that game, the way you would estimate that is, okay, we're guesstimating that 3,000 units will come out right at that time. So we do the 3,000. We're going to multiply it by the amount of hash rate that thing is going to provide. For easy math purposes, we'll do the regular KS5. So we'll do it at 20 terahash a unit. So again, 3,000 units is what we think may come in August. It's kind of more of a best case scenario. And each one's producing about 20 terahash, right? So bringing us to a total of 60,000 terahash. So when we plug it into this converter, which all it's doing is dividing by 1,000, right? This is just easier to visualize when you do it this way. So we plug in our 60,000 terahash and it gives us 60 petahash. So just to summarize, 3,000 units would increase the overall hash rate by about 60 petahash. We're currently sitting at about 250 petahash, okay? So when we look at the grand scheme of things, is that a big chunk? It's about a quarter, right? Doing easy math, let's say we're 240, that's about 25%, so your yield would go down about that percent. So is that a hit? Definitely. Is that a major hit? Not as much, okay? So because the network is more mature, you're gonna get impacted less by the amount of units. Now let's do a more extreme case, which is possible, right? Because again, we are predicting this may be a fatty batch. And even if this many units do not come out at that time, it's potential that throughout time, maybe the months after it, maybe by fall, winter, between what Bitmain releases, what Ice River releases, because if Ice River drops their prices, IB Link drops their prices and they're competitive, people are going to be scooping those up as well. Okay, so factor that in, that it's not just this unit. Okay, so now let's make the prediction that, let's do easy math just to kind of double it. How many units would it take to double the hash rate and therefore have your current yield? Okay, so let's do, so for easy math purposes, it's going to be about 12,500 units. Okay, so 12,500 units, that's kind of what we're predicting, of these KS5. So now we're going to multiply it by the 20 terahash that each one produces, bringing us to a total of 250,000 terahash. So again, when we plug that in, That brings us to that magic number of about 250 petahash, which is what? Our current hash rate. So if we were to get that many units on board, that's how many units it would take of that specific model for the hash rate to double, and therefore our yield to get cut in half. Okay, so that is the benefit of now versus even as early as November, that it just takes so many more units to get that type of decrease in your yield. Okay, so that's one benefit of now versus then. Okay, so yes, it is more expensive than when I got my KS3M. Arguably more potential value here. Okay, just really just depends on what these guys do with their prices though. Again, if this guy comes in at 4K for the 10 terahash unit, potentially better deal here. Okay, so it just really depends. So this is kind of what I'm waiting for. I really want to see what happens here. If they do anything, maybe they don't. Maybe it's just a gradual decrease. Maybe it goes down to 8K 2 weeks from now, and a month from now, 7K, another month, 6K, and then they decide to do that, right? Then at that point, it's no. So it really kind of just depends on what they do from here. That's kind of what I'm waiting for, but that is definitely a big risk factor. So obviously the hash rate is going to increase. We don't know by what extent. Unfortunately, again, guys, we don't have that crystal ball. But again, will 12,500 units be online by September? Not very likely. By the end of the year, maybe, potentially early spring, potentially, right? But just keep in mind of how much time we have left for an affordable unit of one of these bigger guys, okay? Because number one, we're already in May, okay? So if what's typically happens in the typical cycle sometime around this fall, winter, the beginning of that bullish price action. Okay, and if Kaspa does rip prior to then guess what's also going to rip? The prices of these things. Okay, because we do know they have a lot of things coming. When they'll come when they're ready. But like the Rust integration is already beginning to happen. We're already in those beginning stages. KRC20, major exchange listings. A lot of things potentially coming that can increase the price also. Okay, so some things to think about. Things to consider. Also, even doing a more basic calculation, right? We can just look at the yield, okay? Look at the yield, and like I mentioned, I plan for 2025. I'm not looking at current profitability now. I'm looking at what the yield could potentially be, even let's say 12 months from now, because realistically, that's when I'll be looking at selling, okay? So even just eyeballing it, we're currently at about 800 cash a day for the Pro. If I'm valuing my Kaspa in the bull market 12 months from now to be at, let's say, 50 cents, right? Depends on how bullish you are here, and I say that a lot, but in reality, that's true. When you're doing your calculations, it's really going to be dependent on where you think the price is going to go. Okay, if you're bullish on it, maybe you think it's going to go to $1, then you can value it at $1. If you think it's more on the pessimistic side, like I'm just more conservative, my estimate has been 40 cents for quite a bit, so let's peg it up to 50 cents just for easy math purposes. Currently yielding 800. We know no matter what that if nothing else changes, the hash rate doesn't go up, in 12 months from now, it's going to go down to 400, right? Because of that 6% monthly reduction, it equates to, after 12 months, being a halving. Okay, so let's say that happens, and then let's say the hash rate 4x's. Let's say it does go to that point where it 4x's from here, which again would be a ridiculous amount of units. Is that possible? Sure, but again, it's be a ton of units. Okay, but let's say that's worst case scenario. Let's say we go from 800 and then 400 because of that, and let's say it goes up that much. Let's say it goes down to 100 Kaspa a day. If we're valuing our Kaspa at 50 cents a Kaspa, that's still 50 bucks a day in revenue it could potentially be bringing by then. Okay, not to mention that even if you think there's going to be 12,000 units come September, that you would be yielding 400 Kaspa a day for quite a while. Okay, that bringing you to a total of like $200 worth in fiat value per day at that time. Okay, so thinking about it like that, it's like, okay, because you have to think more long term. You have to think long term. You also do have to consider things short term in case things happen. Although it's not as important now with Kaspa, just because, again, like we mentioned, the network hash rate has matured a ton. Initially, it was extremely important. Even 1 month, like I know people who got it, there's a month later, they still haven't gotten their money. Like it's drastically different back then because, again, literally every batch, every month, the hash rate was doubling. If you guys remember early on, it was literally every batch, halved, like it went up massively. We're now at a point where, again, like we had mentioned, we just shown, it takes a lot more units for that to happen. Okay, so just understand where we're at and why it is kind of important. So this isn't like a traditional ASIC, right? A lot of the times I know people were making comments like, oh, you expect that we're going to get ROI in 3 months. In these cases, you do need that to happen. So not so much with Kaspa anymore. We're kind of a little bit beyond that. Not 100% beyond that, but we're a little bit more. But where that's going to be relevant again is with Lithium ASICs, RXD ASICs. Depending on those price points, you're going to want to make your money fast because those price drops will come quick, right? Like I'm going to do the pricing update video either today or tomorrow. And already the spot price on that Lithium ASIC went from 15K down to 7,500. Okay, it hasn't even, it's been a few weeks. There's no way you made $7,500 worth of ALF in that time. Okay, but again, that's one of those things that it has to make sense. You have to be able to get it quick because the hash rate's going to double. Like right now, we're seeing it and it's going to be crazy. In like 4 months from now, if we get a ALF ASIC in a month or two, it's going to be the same thing where every batch, your yield is getting cut in half and cut in half until it gets to that point where things mature to the point where, okay, now it takes a lot more units for that to happen. Okay, so I know it's crazy. I know there's different ways of looking at it. That's just the way I look at it. So do I recommend buying it? That's up to you. Would I consider buying it? Sure. But again, I'm waiting more to see what Ice River does, that KS5L, but it's totally up to you. I know another big thing, a lot of people are bummed out because a lot of people purchased it, but at that 30K, 25, 30K range, and that's part of the game. That's why we mentioned and all those that a big risk factor is those price drops, right? And we had seen it already. This isn't something new. It happened with that KS3 and it's going to continue to happen with these Lithium ASICs. It's going to be the same thing. They're going to come in at 50, 60K or whatever, and then they're going to go down to 40K and down to 12K, etc., etc. And then the next AL5 is going to come out and then it's going to be a repeat, right? Kind of like what we just saw here. It's going to be a repeat of that. Okay, so you have to understand when you're overpaying for these things, that potential is always going to be there because the pricing is based on profitability. It's not the cost to manufacture these units. If it was the cost to manufacture these units, you wouldn't see that. Okay, so I'm sure initial R&D is expensive and they get through that by either volume or these crazy increases early on. But just understand, whenever there's that crazy price, there's possibility that can happen. And as we saw with the KS3, we mentioned that it could happen here, and it did happen, right? And that's why with altcoin ASICs specifically, you have to understand that that's feasible, especially with these popular, very profitable, very greedy ASICs, okay? And again, it's possible that just another company can come in and swoop things up, or Bitmain releases a KS7 3 months from now. Like, a lot of things can happen. But again, the cheaper they are, the less risk that's there, right? Like going from 10, 11K to 5,500, it sucks, but it's more palatable than 30K to 11K, right? It's a drastic difference, but unfortunately that's the name of the game, and it's up to you on what your strategy is kind of going forward from there, right? It's definitely a learning lesson if you haven't experienced that, but that's why we mention it so much, just because that did happen to me. That's a big reason I started this freaking channel. Those first couple videos were regarding that brick behind me right now. Okay. And it's specifically what's happening to you guys is what happened to me there. Not on the same scale, right? Especially so you guys who got like the KD Max and such either. But it's kind of the same thing. And what I did about it ended up just doubling down. So when the K3 came out, I did pre-order that thing. I got it right off the rip, specifically just to kind of make up for that thing. And so far, it's been panning out. The price action sucks, but I'm not really worried about current price action. I'm worried about the future, right? Because again, realistically, the expectations were low until 2025. Now, if we're at 80 cent KDA 12 months from now, then yeah, I'll probably at least break even by the time the amount of yield I've gotten by then. But like, for example, the KA3, it has already made its money back, and I'm working now on paying that guy back, unfortunately. Right? So it's up to you what you do from here. Do you double down? Like, if I were in your shoes, if I did that, I would probably be doubling down and going from there, but it just depends on your thing. Are you completely screwed though? Are you in the same position as that? No, reason being is that you're still profitable, right? Like, for example, with that thing, it is nowhere near profitable. It makes no sense to plug it in, right? At least it's just definitely going to extend that ROI time, that break-even time. But if Kaspa does what we think it's going to do, you're still should hopefully make out well, right? So luckily, at least though, you do have the best miner. It is still profitable, and it's still going to be profitable for quite a while, right? So different strategies there, but please make sure you guys understand that. For you guys who are newer, please learn from those things, right? So again, I've mentioned my personal experience with that thing. Some of you guys have also experienced this. Just understand that it's possible. Sometimes you're in the middle of FOMO, like, it's not going to happen, and then it's not going to happen until it does, right? So just definitely things to think about, guys. Make sure you factor those things in. So with like Kaspa mining, understand the tokenomics, understand the emissions of things, and not just Kaspa. This is all ASICs. This is how I look at anything I'm interested in buying. Okay, you have to look at it that way, and it has to make sense. Like, even when I run numbers and worst case scenario, crazy scenario, it still makes sense, then that's kind of the green light for me, right? So it's totally up to you though, how you see things, how you look at things. Unfortunately, we don't have that crystal ball. We can't say for sure, like, oh, it's definitely a good buy. Like, we don't know. Like, we don't even really know price action wise. Maybe something happens with Kaspa, it goes to zero, right? There's always that possibility. Or next month, the KS7 comes out and they drop 10,000 units, right? A lot of things can happen. Do I think that's realistic? No, right? So even, do I think 12,500 units are going to come out September? No. Even by the end of the year, probably not. Okay, so it's up to you to determine, though, what you think is going to happen and go from there, right? So let's talk about this little KA box. So they did announce the KA box Pro. Okay, so again, a lot of people still haven't even gotten their initial KA box order, and they already released an upgraded version. This guy's coming in at 1.6, which is an upgrade over that 1.18. So this guy's coming in at 600 watts. Okay. Still the same form factor, right? They did Photoshop in another 6-pin. You kind of see how it's uneven there. So assuming it's going to be the same case, it's just going to be a 6-pin. Whether or not it's an overclocked or they just added a couple more chips, we don't really know. But the fact that they were having heat issues with this same thing, and not just currently, right? Even as far back as like that CKB box 2 and a few others, I know there's a lot of heat issues with those. So the fact that they're trying to now squeeze 600 watts out of this thing, kinda a little worrisome. Maybe it's different fans or something, or maybe it's just the mock-up, maybe it's longer, maybe something's different about it. We don't really know, but not really a fan that they released an upgrade already. But again, like we mentioned, this is all because of that Bitmain announcement. So whatever people had in the pipeline, chances are they had this thing ready and they weren't going to drop it for another like 3 to 6 months and then just drop it on you guys, because GoldShell does that. But for whatever reason, they are dropping it now. But again, it's mostly because of that. So again, kind of sucks for anybody who purchased them. Very shitty business practices on their part, but a lot of you guys love supporting them for whatever reason. If the value is there, I honestly don't care about the manufacturer. It's just the value hasn't been there for a long time. A lot of people love defending them, saying, oh, they're entry-level. There's no entry-level ASIC. Like, to me, that's the dumbest argument. Oh, if you want to dabble into, whether it's a little box miner or it's a full-blown ASIC, it's the same kind of configuration. Like, you're not learning anything from there. If you want to make the argument that you want to learn something, learn GPU mining, learn CPU mining, learn things with existing hardware. Like, it's so annoying when people try to make that argument, oh, it's a good way to learn. It's not. GPU mining, to me, my opinion, if you do want to get into things and you're not familiar, that is the best way. It teaches you a lot of different things. It tells you the dynamics of things, like how hash rate works, difficulty works. Like, you learn a ton from there. So if you want to dabble in, that's definitely the best way. But paying extreme prices for essentially garbage, then that's up to you, right? That's just my opinion, at least currently. If the efficiency was there or was at least on par, because obviously it's not going to be the same price point as the bigger ASICs. There does definitely always need to be a premium for the smaller form factor. It just is what it is, right? But if it's nowhere near the current competition, then to me that is overpriced, right? So if this Bitmain is going to be 500 a terahash, this thing can come in at 800 a terahash, 1,000 a terahash, and it's somewhat a better deal, right? So if it were to come in at that price point, I guess, right? It's, especially if it fits your bill like this. Realistically, the wattage though is kind of a better use case. A lot of people make the argument, oh, they want to use it as a heater. In this case, 600 watts is a good size of a good form factor for that. But it just depends on what you value, and I value profitability, and I tend to go where what makes sense, right? So if the value was there, then I'm all for it. Same with any of these others. If they were to make scaled down versions of the more efficient beast, like if they were able to get like somewhere near Bitmain's efficiency and scale down, and obviously even a 20, 30, 40% premium, then it makes sense. But for example, this guy, if we were to plug it in at that same value, the 500 a terahash, so 1.6 by the 500, it would need to be about $800 to be on par. So even if it's a 50% premium, let's say doubling it, let's say it's 100%, you're paying double, it'd be $1,600. I guess that would be fair. That doesn't seem to be the case though, so there are listing prices already. Nhash has it at $2,300, and then Miner Bros at $2,600. So chances are on the GoldShell side, it'll be listed at probably right under 2K, probably like $19.99 will be my guess. Maybe they go a little bit cheaper, but again, it's extremely hard to get them directly from GoldShell. But at $2,300, what I consider, especially considering the new dynamics here, not at all, right? So it depends on your viewpoint. I get it. Some people love just collecting these things. They love the aesthetic. They want to support the network. It's like, if you're going to support the network, I'd rather spend $300 on one of these things and support the network through that means, right? So for these price points, I'm not the biggest fan in the world. Again, it's totally up to you. I look at it in terms of profitability, right? Is it neat though? I'm not going to say that it's not. It's very cool to get something that much hash out of such a small unit, right? That you can have. I can have it in the office over here. I can have it plugged in indoors. Especially for you guys who can't have a larger ASIC, you can't do those things. It's just the value for me isn't there, and that's the biggest beef here, right? And it's just really crappy that, again, the regular K box just came out and they're releasing an upgraded version already, right? So, and they still haven't even released their pro model. Or worse, they did tease having a professional miner, meaning a larger unit. They still never have released there. At this point, it's like they've waited so long. If it's nowhere near 500 a terahash, they're kind of wasting their time, especially if Ice River does undercut them. Because again, if they're just gonna match, I would rather go with Bitmain, right? For me to pick a manufacturer that's less quality, less reliability, less durability, it needs to be enticing to do so, right? So even matching it still kind of doesn't make sense, and I'm sure they're starting to see a lot of people's comments, and a lot of other people are also getting fed up with their little practices, right? So they're not getting the hint though, right? Because they're going to keep doing it, but it's just the value needs to be there more. So again, is it a bad unit? If it does what it promises, very cool concept. It's just, for me, the value definitely isn't there, right? So totally up to you there. We're going to have to wait and see what the rest of the competition does, what like IB-Link does, which realistically the only ones I'd be interested in would be the Ice River unit, just because I did have a good experience with the KS3M. I would consider here, again, the value needs to be there though. If they're just going to match Bitmain, I'd rather just go with the Bitmain unit, right? So kind of also waiting on other announcements on other lithium ASICs, the L9 price point. We're waiting to see, because again, I do have room for one more ASIC. Kind of don't know where to go though. Definitely appealing here though, but again, this guy coming in at 4K would be a good target point. Do I think it's going to come in that cheap? Probably not, at least not now. Maybe right before that guy drops. We're going to have to wait and see. We'll see how the K box sells. Again, a lot of you guys love this thing though. A lot of you guys love supporting GoldShell for whatever reason, so I'm sure it'll do well. but it's just the value's not there for me. At 1500, maybe, but again, I'm not a big fan of the small form factor. Maybe for like a lithium or one of those where there's risk to reward, you know what I'm saying? But like, not here. For me, the value just isn't there for me, right? So again, it's totally up to you. Everybody has their things. Some people love it, but it's just not there for me, right? So let me know in the comments, guys, what you guys think. Would you guys consider this thing? Are you guys more under the mindset that no, all ASIC manufacturers are garbage, all ASIC mining is garbage, you're just buying shovels? I hear that argument all the time. It's on your viewpoint, it's timing, it's risk to reward. There's a lot of things. I've had pretty good success aside from that big old learning lesson back there, which again was the beginning of my ASIC journey. Definitely a lot of learning lessons, and that's a big part of the reason why I'm so harsh on a lot of these manufacturers that aren't Bitmain, right? Bitmain tends to release the biggest and the best. There just is a ton of risk with these other manufacturers. So for me to take on that risk, it needs to be a value there, right? And when I'm paying a premium, not really my thing, right? Especially after learning that lesson there, right? So hopefully you guys learned something from this. Or if you guys aren't familiar, some of you guys have been OGs, you guys know, we talk about this frequently. Want to burn that in your head just so that doesn't happen to you, right? Again, at the end of the day, that's kind of the purpose of all these things. That's why strategy is big, especially with altcoin ASICs, guys. It's a different world with like Bitcoin. That is way more mature, so that's a whole different game. Other networks that are more mature, even like Litecoin, Dogecoin, that network is much more mature. It's these newer algorithms, a lot of strategy, a lot of timing. Sometimes we can both buy the units within just a couple months difference. One can get wrecked, one can make out. We've seen that over and over, and it will happen. So that's why like doing these predictions, risk versus reward, running numbers, what is the likelihood of that bigger, better miner? All these things weigh into it, right? All the strategy weighs into these things, right? So I know people are going to complain about it and do all these, it's not worth it. It's totally up to you, right? So we've seen many examples where it has paid off, many examples where it hasn't. It's up to you to learn that lesson. It's up to you if you want to take that risk, right? For some, it's definitely not worth it at all. And even for me, that's why, again, I'm so picky with that. When I do that, I'm very harsh on my reviews. I'm very harsh on all those things for those reasons, right? So again, let me know in the comments, guys, what you guys think. Please comment, like, subscribe, guys. Thank you for watching, and I am out.